But the kid knew no English and we were the enemy to him. Paritsky was shooting at the hill, over the ruins of the buildings at the end of the road. He put his right foot under the kid, lifted him, and the kid flew 3 feet down the road. Move kid, move, go, go. And then the kid was moving and crying and screaming, but he was alive, and I thought, if the world is just Paritsky should get a medal. Leininger had a kid by the shirt and was half dragging him, and then I awoke. There was no medal for the likes of us. I'm sure no one said thanks, to me or Turbo or Paritsky. Jonas, why don't you remember the little girl? The one you carried in the picture? Do you remember first seeing her? No, I don't remember her at all. You know, she is mentioned in the novel, and in some of the statements by others, but not yours. Maybe I'm blocking her out. Think so? Emily looked at the therapist, understanding better the nature of Jonas's shell shock. What happened to the girl, Jonas? Emily asked. She already knew, from the reports. In the novel, what happened to the girl? I don't remember her in the novel, sorry, or any of the reports. The therapist let there be a pause. Emily, how do you feel about Jonas? I've known him 4 months or so. I'm not falling in love with him because I already hit bottom. I fell. I've met no one like him. Do you have trouble saying the words? I love Jonas. I've never felt like this before. He is a good and decent man. She loves you, Jonas. What about that? I feel good but scared. Family. Children. We are different religions. Different? Emily smiled. He's Catholic. I'm Presbyterian. We both practice. Why are you scared of children and family, Jonas? Jonas thought. The heartache. The possibility of loss. The work. The responsibility. Loss. If you love Emily, she may have something bad happen, a car wreck, a plane crash, a random act of violence. Anyone you love is at risk. Yes, and families hurt so when a child dies. What happened to that girl, Jonas? Jonas closed his eyes. Emily held his hand and looked at his struggle. He remembered turning and running, the non-combatants making their way down that street, small arms fire, machine gun fire diminished, screaming, and he tripped. A child crying, a girl beneath his feet. He kept his eyes closed. I tripped on this girl, maybe 7. She was crying. I scooped her up and got us running. We were making it. She was crying and struggling in my arm, and then she was not there. What do you mean, not there? She disappeared. We have a picture. We know you saved her. No, I did not. I held her up. Hi. They could see her. I was running down the center of the street. He stopped and an image formed in his mind. So they could shoot her head off. Jonas was crying silently. Emily too. Silently, the therapist was not. Callie had worked with the victims of violence many times. If I had just put her on her feet and let her run, I made her a target. The session ended there. Hi, Jonas. This is Sharon. Sharon Scott. Mrs. Scott. Unexpected. Would you come to supper Friday? Emily and my husband will be there. And Chris, Emily's brother. Please. Of course. Thank you. Still, unexpected. You're important to Emily, Jonas. You are a singer, ma'am. Of songs. You just don't realize. Maybe I do. A little. Friday. 6. Yes, ma'am. 6, Friday. I arrived at Emily's a little before 6. Mrs. Scott met me at the door. Jonas, good to see you. Come in. You have to meet Chris. She led me into the living room where I found Emily, Dad, and Chris. All stood. Emily said, Jonas, this is my big brother, Chris. He got the height in the family. Chris was perhaps 5 feet 5 inches, about my age, with brownish red hair. He was slight, perhaps 140 pounds. Jonas, pleasure. We shook hands and then sat in the overstuffed chairs. Chris, you're in school. What are you studying? I asked. I'm at Stanford Law. I graduate in a month. I'm here now because Dad had a plane coming this way from California, so I hopped it. I'll return Sunday on a morning Delta flight. A lawyer. I guess you've seen all about my case? Yeah, you're quite a topic in seminars. We even had 2 second years stage a debate as to whether or not you should have been charged with a crime, he said, laughing. I looked at him, and then his sister. So which side would you have supported? Tough case, but I was for no true bill. You were put in an untenable situation. Who won the debate? Well, we're holding your mock trial Tuesday, sorry. He was smiling. I thought, maybe that would give me something to talk about with Callie. I'd like to see it. Could you get me in? I'll take a personal day at school. It's in California, you know. Yeah, well, I haven't paid rent since I lived in a dorm. I'd like to go if you think I could get in. I'm sure Professor Wirtz would permit it. She might even like for you to comment. Can I get in without anyone knowing who I am? I mean, once the discussion is on, that would be fine. But I'd like to hear what people are saying without knowing I was involved, I said. Fine by me. I'll text Wirtz and see what she thinks. Great. Wonder what my therapist will think. So I found myself flying to San Jose out of Dayton that Monday. I didn't even have to skip a class to make the flight. I flew for San Jose, rented a car, and arrived about midnight at my motel. I was nervous about the next day and had some difficulty sleeping. I arrived on campus early, about 8 o'clock, but I was able to meet up with Chris. We walked to the trial room where I met Professor Wirtz. Professor Wirtz, this is Jonas Sims. Jonas, Sheila Wirtz. We shook hands. She smiled at me. I didn't realize when I first assigned this project that one of my students knew the subject, she said. We actually met Friday. I'm sort of dating his sister, I said. What do you mean, sort of? Asked Chris. Okay, I'm dating his sister, I said more definitely, and all three of us smiled. Well, Mr. Sims, you may sit anywhere in the gallery. I won't introduce you until the trial is over and the jury gives its verdict. We usually take about an hour for each side, then 20 minutes for the deliberation. Then we discuss the case and make comments. I'll introduce you at that point. I have some slides if you have a projector, I said. Yes. This room is built for it. May I have them? I can set up the projector. I handed them over. Chris said, I can't sit with you in the gallery because I'm in the jury on this one, sorry. No problem. I'll just act like I belong here and watch how things go. Great, said the professor, and I made my way to a seat that would afford me a view, yet keep me out of the public eye. Students were straggling in. Those with roles were in their trial clothes, suits. A student was even the judge, wearing a robe. It looked and felt like a courtroom, and the students were quite serious. Apparently, they held a lot of these as simulations for their learning value. It was impressive. I noticed that the prosecutor and the defense had copies of the documents, but not enhanced photos. The defense also had Jeremiah in agony on her table. I found myself intrigued. Some students sat about me, but they knew one another and didn't seem surprised there was a visitor. The trial was much shorter than it would have been in real life, but the important points were met. I was charged with disobedience and mutiny. I thought the case was made for both. However, the military always hedges its orders. Only lawful orders should be obeyed. So the defense made its case by showing that the orders were followed to the point they became unlawful, and then were disobeyed. That mousy little girl with the sour disposition made a case for my side that I thought was powerful. So did the jury. I was found not guilty, and I actually breathed a sigh of relief. At that point, the professor sent the role players into the gallery. Again, we find someone not guilty. This is becoming a trend. I think I'd want you all for my jury, the professor said. We'll proceed a little differently today, as we have a special guest in attendance. Several students looked around, but as I was not the only visitor they searched on, I was surprised to get a phone call from Chris Scott asking if it would be okay for Jonas Sims to sit in on the mock trial. I of course said of course. Jonas, if you would come down here and introduce yourself, please? I made my way to the front of the room, feeling their eyes on me. I thanked the professor. Hello, I am Jonas Sims. I teach high school history and go to graduate school. I should get a master's in history next month at the University of Cincinnati. I flew out here because I spent 2 years wondering at my guilt with only a lawyer to talk to. I wanted to see how an impartial jury would have looked at the evidence, and I thank you for that. You know, the novel that Colonel Marx wrote is about the ordeal I have faced. I hope and think that your trial may help me better adjust to the facts of what I did. I was a little worried how I would feel if I had been found guilty, so I thank you for your help. Dr. Wirtz then stepped forward. Do you have any questions? Hands went up all over. They're not shy anymore. Just call on anyone. I only know one person besides Dr. Wirtz, so I'll just point. I pointed to a girl on the right. How do you know Chris Scott? I smiled. Chris, you want to take that one? He called out, he's dating my sister. Everyone laughed. Yeah, you should know that she's shorter than Chris and resentful, I said. Students smiled. I pointed to a guy who'd been in the jury. What is your agony, as the title indicates? I took a deep breath. There was something about the title that seemed overstated to me. Agony? To me, it implied great suffering. Was that accurate? Was I suffering still? I said, guilt. I was pretty sure that the orders were dubious. The captain gave several signs that the mission was to kill everyone we could get out of the village into the field on the far side. First platoon was supposed to discriminate between combatants and non-combatants. That is not easy to do if you intend to fire upon contact. I radioed them there were no combatants, but then they killed the entire first bunch to leave the village. 29, eventually. I forced those people into that field. Why didn't you refuse the order from the start? That would have been the military way. But I thought I'd have been relieved, and the mission would go ahead without my reservations meaning anything. I considered it. That is the official response to an order considered illegal. But I'd be relieved, and the mission would continue. The Marine Corps motto is always faithful. I suspected the order would not be followed correctly, but I had no evidence other than the battle excitement of my company commander. He wanted us to go in with guns ablazing. If you remember that phrase, I identified the people as non-combatants. My voice cracked, I shook my head, and there was quiet for a moment. Sorry, I guess I answered that. I pointed to the prosecutor, a guy who I thought had done a creditable job. Did you spend any time in jail? Yeah, I did. In the Marines and Navy, it's called the brig. I was in the jail in Kabul and a brig on Camp Lejeune for a few weeks before they put me on base restriction. So yeah, it was tough telling Chris's parents I'd been in jail, you better believe. Laughter. I pointed to a guy in a pink shirt. What do Marines act like when they go into battle? I mean, are they afraid to move? Or excited like it's the big game? Or frantic? Or what? I've been asked this question before. I think you've kind of nailed it. I remember some helicopter insert I read of where they got all hyped up like before the big football game, because they expected to be shot at as soon as they got out. But I usually wanted my guys cool and calm, steely-eyed with determination. I don't like the whole guns ablazing idea. There's a book by a guy about this very thing, in World War II anyway. The Warriors, by J. Glenn Gray, I think. Another called The World Within War. I can't remember the author's name. You might want to check them out. Another followed on. How is it you have references at hand that you can call up to answer a question like that? I mean, it was out of left field. The Marines teach about war. The commandant has a recommended and mandatory reading list. Officers go to school for most of a year, some longer, learning weapons and tactics and leadership. We study. It's like graduate school, but constant and concentrated. I pointed to an older woman, who I had noticed watching the trial but taking no part. Do you have any psychological issues stemming from the murder of so many innocents? I asked, what do you mean? She said, any PTSD or other issues? Yes, nightmares. And I did not remember the events surrounding the little girl, even when I read them in the official statements and the novel. After reading the novel, I could not remember the part about the little girl in the novel. These memories came back in therapy. Recently, I stopped then, having faced a bogeyman. I spoke, but no sound came for a moment. I held up my hand. Oh, and you said innocence. I'm not sure all of them were innocent. I mean, a kid is by definition, I think. But the women, their husbands were absent, possibly fighting with the Taliban, working for them. Non-combatants often support the enemy. No one ran up to us and said, my husband is fighting with the Taliban and he's hiding one click away. No one pointed out a weapons cache. There is no reason to think they were our friends. This village was in a Taliban area, but they were all non-combatants, and that should be enough to secure their lives. The woman and a few others were nodding. I pointed to a guy in the audience. Do you believe that this atrocity could have been prevented? Yes. For some reason, sometimes, there is an overconfidence in the accuracy of intelligence, sometimes by those in the field. We did not find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and in this case, we found no combatants in Al-Gator. Someone in the chain of command should have said no, especially once the lack of identifiable enemy was reported. I pointed to the defense attorney. Why weren't the company commander and the first platoon commander charged with crimes? I don't know if they were even considered at issue. The company commander was promoted soon after Al-Gator and was congratulated for a great victory, I understand. I was not there. That is what I heard over time. The first platoon commander was probably my best friend. We have not spoken since the night before the attack. His family is big in politics. My lawyer wondered if that had something to do with it. His dad is in the Senate. Professor? Ready with the projector? One of my men, against rules, used his cell phone to take some pictures that day. Oh good. I just got these from Colonel Marks when he defended me in front of the school board where I teach. I hope they are in order. Lights down some? Great on-the-fly technical improvisation at Stanford Law. The first came up. That's the first he took. If you look, you can see the field with women and children. The guy with the missing foot there with an old man. I'm off to the right just out of the picture, 15 feet or so from that building. Next picture, please. It came up. In the original, it is too fuzzy to make out the dead old guy, but here you can see they have both been killed and the building is a shambles. I ordered us back at this point. I also ordered us to return fire so we could make it. Next, please. That is me on the right with a kid. In the back, you see Turbo holding a woman under his arm and shooting toward the machine gun that was firing at us. He says he killed them. I don't see how he could have under such duress, but about this time the one machine gun ceased. I was investigated for murder for ordering the return fire. There was a moment then in which Jonas could not speak and he was not sure why. He realized history is real. It all was real, people. Oh my God. Oh, time calmed me. I had control. Some other pictures followed. Finally, there I am. I have been relieved and I bandaged some kid's foot. He'd stepped on some glass. The defense attorney's hand went up again. Yes? She said, would you sign my copy of Jeremiah in Agony? I laughed. Happy to. I had nothing to do with writing it. As a matter of fact, Colonel Marks wrote it against my wishes. But I thought it was great when I read it. I wrote in it, the world needs good lawyers. You have a gift. It has been my pleasure to watch you work in class. Jonas Sims. I was glad I made the trip. It built some rapport with Chris, and I started to see myself as a player in history. It increased my sense of significance. I thanked Dr. Wirtz. She said it was her pleasure, and that she thought she better understood some of the pressures on our servicemen and women. She said, I have read one other of Tom Marks's books, the one on the Dubas murder. I think now I'll be sure to read Jeremiah. Good luck to you, Mr. Sims. She had a nobility of manner. I flew back that evening. It was midnight when we landed in Dayton. I was home around 1. Emily thought the plane was a little high and a little fast, so she said, let's slip it in, and began her left turn for approach and made the radio call. She kept the left wing down and ruddered the nose to the right, being careful not to raise the nose much. She let the plane slip a bit left so that when she straightened out it would be aligned with the runway. She stopped the left turn with her right foot, giving a little more rudder until she reached the maximum. The plane slowed just a bit, flying catawampus through the air, and lost altitude until it was a better approach height. Emily liked returning empty planes because she could perform maneuvers that would alarm passengers unnecessarily. Imagine if we had some passengers, they'd be going bonkers about now, said her co-pilot, Remy Jinks, who was a long-time pilot for the company. He had many more hours than Emily, but since it was an empty return flight, he had relinquished the pilot's chair. Emily eased off the rudder and let the wing come up, and the plane was ready to land. Jonas was waiting for her as she taxied the plane into the hangar. A few moments later, after filling in the log and performing other post-flight duties, she met him in the waiting area. She was surprised to see him there. It was the first time he'd visited her workplace. She was more surprised when he greeted her with a quick kiss on the lips. He had kissed her a few times, but never in public. It felt familiar and right and good, but it was her workplace and she didn't think it appropriate. Hi, guy. Something up? She said. No, not really. Probably shouldn't kiss you here. Huh? He said, looking around. There was a secretary or clerk who was smiling and a uniformed older guy following Emily, probably the other pilot. So there was not too much damage done. I'll take him when I can get him, she said, smiling. Oh, Remy, she said, reaching out and grabbing the guy by the arm. Remy, this is Jonas, my boyfriend, she said. Remy has flown for Dad for decades now. Jonas held out a hand and Remy shook it. Remy said, I finally get to meet the famous Jonas. Jonas smiled. My pleasure, sir, he said. Remy said, I have stuff to do. I'll leave you kids now. Good to meet you, Jonas. You too, sir. So, Emily said, are we celebrating the end of the school year a little early? Our final theses being turned in? What? I've decided to go on a few of Tom's signings and interviews. Just a few. That'll be next month and last until late July. So I may not always be around. Can I get a list of dates you'll be gone? She asked. As soon as I find out myself. I've agreed to 10 separate events. Summer is really a vacation for teachers, and I don't want this stuff to overwhelm me. I will definitely be done by end of July, and then I'll have 10 days or so before school preparation takes over. Jonas was shaking his head. Any idea where and when for any of the dates? She asked. I know they want me to go to a book signing first. Then they want me to go with Tom to several of the TV shows. Well, I had no idea when you showed up in class that you would become so famous. She laughingly said. Do you have stuff to do now? Jonas asked. Yeah, I have to stop in the office, and there are some things I need to fill out, but it's only a few minutes. Come along. I'll introduce you to anyone who comes by. So I met the gang. Saw her dad. She was clinging to me, and I liked it. She introduced me as her boyfriend. Callie sat a few feet away from Jonas. They were alone at this session. Did you like Emily? Very much. She loves you. She introduced me to people she works with as her boyfriend. How did you feel? Good. Good. Very good. like I belonged and mattered. I hate to bring us back to our sore subject, but it must be so. So you remember the little girl now. What did you do immediately after you realized she'd been killed? It was hard for Jonas. He turned his head back and forth a few times. I felt the shock of the round that killed her, threw her, and suddenly she was leaning. I looked at her, and it was obviously a fatal wound. Right away, I stopped running and put her down on the street as if I were putting a healthy child to bed. I put my hand on her cheek for a second. I couldn't on her forehead because it was horrible. Then I ran on, and soon we were relatively safe. Do you think you did anything morally wrong? Morally? I didn't use my head. I was stupid in such a hurry and didn't think how I endangered the child. How many decisions did you make that day? How many? Thousands. What if you had left her to run, and she had been killed for falling a little behind, or not running at all? You are asking if I'd left her alone and she died, would I still feel this way? Yes, probably, for not getting her to move faster. What do little girls mean to you, Jonas? What do you mean? Well, you teach at a school with boys and girls, yet you go to the girls' softball games. They flood into the stands to meet your girlfriend, a girl who is slight, very youthful, I might add. You pick me without looking at a picture, a woman. What do girls mean to you? Jonas was silent. Then he stopped, and spoke. I think girls are home to me, especially younger girls. Maybe that's part of my attraction to him. Girls represent the good in my life. Desire. I've not suffered or been teased or bullied by any girls. I think when the little girl died, it was like my conception of home was attacked. By one of us. It would not be like it had been. For me, because I'd failed to protect, we'd attacked our own home. So you'd failed to save a girl in danger, who only had a chance because you were there. I don't understand. You followed orders that threatened these non-combatants. You disobeyed when you realized they were unlawfully executed. You gave her a chance. She panicked and stopped running. You tripped on her. You frantically but reasonably tried to move her to safety, and a round that could have killed you killed her. Thousands missed you that day. You were lucky. That poor child was not. I'd rather it had killed me. I know. Emily knows. I think your parents know. Anyone who has read Jeremiah knows. It is a good book. You are a good man, Jonas. You're only saying that because I'm paying you. You are doing it again. It is okay for you to admit you are a good person. You are a good guy. I was not enough. Not that day. No one was. No one always is. How many times does a great hitter strike out with the winning run on base? I like Jeremiah, but he is only me to my flaw. I should have saved the girl. You are not home if you cannot save her. I feel sad when I think of her, every day. Sadness is not unhealthy when there is a good reason. Sadness heals. Now that you remember, perhaps you will heal. Hope so. You saved 160 people. I should have 161. I asked Emily to a nice restaurant in Cincinnati. We dressed up. I picked her up, gave her some flowers to put in a vase, held her hand to the car, and held doors and used the valet service. I spared no expense. The service was excellent. The waitress saw we mostly wanted to be left alone once we ordered wine and the meal. I held her hand as we waited for the meal. I am in love. I am still not whole. I have guilt issues, but I love you. I hope you return my feelings, and I expect that things will be more serious between us soon, if not beginning now. She looked in my eyes. I've known for some time that I don't want a life without you by my side, Jonas. If you ask, I will say yes. I am in no hurry. I have met no one with your humility and goodness or caring, and I don't just mean caring for me. You care for everyone, and you are loved by me. I pulled out a long jewelry box, which contained a necklace. I opened it. I got this because while I am not ready for an engagement, I want you to know that with all my foibles and flaws and baggage, I love you and want the best for you. I hope you like it. Emily's eyes got big. There were several small diamonds around her birthstone, on a thin gold chain. It is beautiful. Would you put it on me? I'm wearing this faux pearl now. I'll get it off. She removed her necklace. I stood up and moved around her. The necklace was delicate, and I fumbled it, but I finally latched it correctly. She placed her other necklace in the box and got out a compact and looked at the new necklace in the mirror. How beautiful your skin is next to it, I said, still behind her with my lips beside her ear. Jonas, I am overwhelmed. She turned and we kissed. It was a lovely and romantic dinner. We finished around 9, then drove to a park and looked at the stars and lights of the city. We sat on a bench, kissing occasionally, and the kisses hardened and became hot. It had been a long time since that had happened to me, and I found myself wanting the night to go on for us. I thought fleetingly of plans to spend the night together, and I thought Em might agree. But no, I don't want the night to end, Em, but I also don't want our first time to be sneaking around and worrying that your parents might find out. We're not children, but our living with parents makes adult decisions more difficult. Jonas. She shook her head, smiling. I am your partner in this, not your guest. I am ready to take these steps, but as your equal. I am looking at a life, not a date. We took one step tonight, but we still have a way to go, and it will be a wonderful journey. Tonight we admitted mutual passion. We contemplate building a family. Love abides. It will endure a few more months. She squeezed his arm. It is nice to know you have noticed my desire, recently. We headed home. I kissed her at her door, her arms tightly about my neck, our lips hard together. I had a desire, a future, a woman counting on me, a family of my own to make. The school year is over, and you have your master's degree. Congratulations. Thank you. Mostly I want to read Emily's paper about atrocity. She compared me to Callie. Beyond that, I have no idea about it. She can be coy. Tough to write a paper about a man you're falling in love with. The professor has an interesting judgment to make. He introduced us. Practically set us up. A friend? Yes. My advisor. Just a few years older. So you have spoken openly with Emily about your feelings? Yes, she and I are serious now. We want the relationship to progress toward a life together. Progress? In many ways, we have limited our lives. We live at home with our parents. I have made no attempt at sex. I have kissed her, but only recently have those kisses intimated sexuality or great desire. I have been almost platonic, but not quite. Emily is a patient woman. I saw strength in her. I think it is character. So have you decided to go on the book tour? Do you think I should? Do you want to? I am afraid. Of what? I don't know. I have answered questions in front of a law school class, family, anyone. Always I have been able to since I got past the little girl. Although at times the emotion of the memory slows me. Have I still a guilt that inhibits me? Perhaps it is not guilt. Could be the sadness of the tragedy. Perhaps it is responsibility. What? Blame? I think you ignore the people who actually followed orders. Blindly. Alvy? The captain? How do you feel about them? Pause. Then, angry. Disappointed. In both of them, they ignored what I told them, what was happening before them. The captain ridiculed my question, criticized my actions. Alvy was always unsure of himself. He would trust the decision of others above him over his own judgment, as would most Marines. And the captain? Ambition. Blind faith in his boss and dismissed the concerns of lower ranks. Things will go right if you all just do as I say. He ridiculed my concerns at the mission briefing. That sort of guy. Perhaps you should think of them. How are they reacting to the book? And the machine gunners, who fired at non-combatants. Someone machine gunner. Rifleman fired at a little girl in a Marine's arms and shot her in the head, intentionally, perhaps with deliberation. Jonas considered it, then he said, "You think it might be murder? I mean, she would have been hard to mistake for a combatant. That is abominable. I assumed it was a machine gun firing thousands of rounds, recoiling, jumping one particular round imperfectly controlled. Yes, you were careful at the start to control your rounds to avoid a tragedy on your end. Yes, when you just keep firing, you can fail to make careful judgment. Do you think she was killed deliberately?" Jonas was quiet for a long time, remembering, sometimes mumbling. Fire was diminishing, he remembered. Was a machine gun still firing? He stood and walked behind Callie's chair. Perhaps M16. Yes, maybe. It would have been hundreds of yards, but a child in arms would be distinct. Marines practiced those distances, hitting a bullseye about a foot across in 2 rounds. Could have been. So can you reach a conclusion? It was murder. All of it. They knew what they were doing. Are you a judgmental man, Jonas? No, but murder is murder, whether or not there is a war, whether or not the colonel told the lieutenant colonel who told the captain who told the platoon commanders. All of us could have said, "I will not do this sin." One did. Jonas had his eyes shut. I so much wanted us to be good guys, but I have to settle for a low standard. We are better than they. I met up with Tom Marks at his office in Washington, D.C. I was dressed for the first bookstore that evening. I decided I would be casual, meaning a sport coat and tie, khaki trousers. My hair was trimmed off my ears. I found Marks's firm. There was a receptionist, her back protected by a floor-to-ceiling wall that prevented anyone seeing a lawyer before the lawyer desired. The receptionist was friendly, beautiful, and intelligent. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" she asked. "I am here to see Tom Marks." "Have you an appointment?" "He knows I am meeting him here." "Who may I say is calling?" Jonas. He'll recognize it. She picked up the phone, punched some numbers. Mr. Marks? There is a Mr. Jonas H? I heard Jonas yelled from somewhere behind the fancy partition and heard loud footsteps. The receptionist said wryly, "It appears he was expecting you." She was funny. It was a warm greeting, he and I shaking hands as the receptionist looked on. "Janice, this is Jonas Sims, the real Jeremiah Perkins," Mark said. Janice stood and shook my hand. "An honor, Mr. Sims. I wish I'd known I'd have brought my copy in to have you sign it. It would make my husband's day." "Thank you, ma'am," I said. "Maybe Colonel Marks can arrange something." "I'll take care of it, Janice. We'll be in my office," Mark said, and he pulled me into a richly appointed law office. "Jonas, the book has taken off. The revelation of your identity has boosted sales beyond any projections. The publisher is happy, the booksellers are ecstatic, and I am happy. I am glad. Very few people have associated me with the book, despite the article in the Inquirer months ago. At a wedding reception, somebody in Emily's family announced it. The school board, of course. I've brought it up a few times. Talked to a law class at Stanford, talked to my students. I'm glad it has not proved a disruption. And people have been well disposed? Yes. Okay, I'm getting rich off you. We should talk about that. Novel America will pay you based on total sales during the 2 months you are involved in the tour, plus the month following. Is that acceptable? How much money are we talking? Jonas asked. It could be thousands, based on current sales. It's not inconceivable that it would amount to $20,000 or more. Plus motel, meals, and travel? Tom was nodding. All that. Jonas was incredulous. For 10 appearances? Yep. Happy to do it then. Tom went on. Our first book signing together. Usually someone from the store introduces me, then I talk about the book for 20 minutes, or until people look bored, and then I ask for questions. Now that you are here, I'll summarize the book and introduce you, and you can go into details of the incident, if you don't mind. I'll be there beside you. Refer anything to me if you want, or if you have trouble, I'll interject. I want you to be comfortable and get used to questions. Do any of them give you a hard time? Yeah, some redhead in Cincinnati was trying to, but her boyfriend stepped in. He laughed. But no, mostly it has been positive. There were war protesters at one store in Boston, but they hadn't read the book and assumed it was a justification of the war. Most of the people who'd read the book were wondering why they were protesting the book when it was on their side. I think they assumed since the author was a Marine. So we headed to Mutt Inn, Jeff's Megabooks outside Arlington, Virginia, an independent upscale 2-story bookstore that practically anchored a small mall. It was quite a setup, with a restaurant and toy store attached. Tom drove us, and I was quiet contemplating the tone of my remarks. It was like teaching class, but not. It was easy and even fun. The number of people was larger than I expected. The book signing in Cincinnati had been early in the book's promotion, relatively, with interest and word of mouth increasing. Now there were many who had read the book and wanted to meet these people, the author, the main character's inspiration, who mattered to them because the book had touched them, or interested them, or upset them. But Marks had not informed the bookstore that I would be there. Tom stepped to the lectern in a room with perhaps 75 chairs facing tables of the book, a wood panel wall, a fireplace. Tom spoke easily and with many smiles about the success of the book, why he'd written it as fiction, and then he introduced me. He said, Jeremiah in Agony is based on a young Marine officer's experience of one day in the war. He did not seek attention. Indeed, getting him here today was not easy. At this the crowd buzzed, surprised that I was there. I thought it had been announced? Maybe not. Jonas has faced the disapprobation of my beloved Marine Corps, the threat of jurisprudence for 2 years, restriction to base for a prolonged period, over 100 hours of interrogation including one session over 25 hours long, for actions that in any other circumstance would be considered courageous and beyond the call of duty. He has received no medal, no commendation, no pat on the back. Well, except for me. After a 1,000-page report was completed, no charges were brought, and he was discharged from the Marines. All of that is in the novel. Since then, he has started a new career as a high school teacher, he has obtained teacher license in his home state, and he has recently obtained a master's degree in history. It's my honor, and I mean it, to introduce the real Jeremiah Perkins, Jonas Sims. Jonas? I was standing to the side, leaning against the bookshelf. Now I force myself forward to the lectern. There was some clapping, but no one ever knows if it is appropriate to clap in a bookstore. I smiled and nodded, said, "Thank you." I spoke for a brief time, and then people started raising hands to ask questions, so I shrugged and started answering. Do you think the military services are responsible for creating a culture in which atrocity is encouraged? This from a bookish, round, short young woman on whom I called to get an easy question first. I sneaked a glance at Tom, who was smiling. That is the sort of question I went to graduate school to discuss. I think that there are a lot of factors which affect the event of atrocity, as the book analyzes well. The military culture is based not on consensus but hierarchy, but there are many opportunities for debate within that structure. Rarely is an order given without the possibility of discussion. One is not requested to act then, but ordered to. One is protected by that. It was not my choice, I had to do it, or I was breaking the law. But then we have the idea of legality, that an unlawful order cannot be followed, or again one is breaking a law. Also, the nature of war has reduced the use of uniforms, especially by our current enemies. It is very, very difficult to identify the enemy, especially in a timely manner, or without endangering your troops. There is also the fact remarked on by the French author Lartigue that our civilization demands that we avoid atrocity. The enemy celebrates his creation of it. So I am answering your question by saying, the cause is very complicated, ranging from individual fear to national arrogance, and any modern civilized armed nation will need to consider measures to reduce the possibility of atrocity in modern war. I pointed to an older gentleman with a copy of the book open in his hand. Where do you live? Are you married? Do you have any children? It's been 2 years since your discharge. I smiled. I live out in the country, actually in a small town called Skygray, Ohio. I was born there. I'm not married, but I'm thinking about it. So is she. And I have no children, although I teach 130 freshmen and sophomores at a Catholic school. And so the questions ran the gamut for the next 25 minutes. Tom answered some, I answered some, and it was almost a tag team seminar as we dealt with the incident and writing of the book. Then we signed books for well over an hour. The bookstore manager said more than 150 people were in line, and they sold over 75 copies that day. She said if they had known I'd be there, they might have gotten more by advertising. Tom laughed, said I was just a bonus, and the lady smiled too. So, was it okay? I asked Tom. Very good. That first question you could still be answering. You did very well. Now we do a TV show, next Thursday. If you want, why don't you fly to New York Wednesday early? We'll talk about the show, and then we'll be fresh on Thursday. Sounds okay to me. What's the show? Morning Joe. It's a newsy/political talk show with lots of regulars sitting around, drinking coffee and talking. It has both a conservative and a liberal running things, and mostly they seem to get along despite their differences, mainly because they both descry the bad things their parties do and laugh at the silly things. I've seen it. Okay, well, Morning Joe got us some notice. I was asked, do you think Americans are just bloodthirsty? I said, Americans are ashamed of their atrocities. The Taliban think atrocity is the means to victory. I said, good officers should have objected to orders that were not clear, whose implementation would result in the deaths of non-combatants. It was a failure of the chain of command and a failure of character. A few days later, we were featured on a Fox afternoon news show, then one of their morning shows, then shows came Fast and Furious. They asked me to do more appearances during the 2 months, and I agreed to terms. I wondered how the publisher could afford the motels and plane rides because I was flying in and out of cities one after the other. The book was selling. Tom was with me at each one, then he couldn't make one and I went alone. My mother was upset my hair was awry on TV once. Emily seemed to enjoy the ride. She thought it ironic that I should be famous. Things wound down finally, and then there was just one more appearance at a bookstore in the country near Norman, Oklahoma. Tom was not with me for this one. The bookstore was small and independent, booked as a favor to one of our publisher's former assistants who owned the place in his retirement. There was a good crowd, I thought. Perhaps 50 seated and another 25 hanging around for quite a while. I spoke for the requisite time, explaining my actions as the book did much better. Then as I was talking about my PTSD and how I was facing it, I saw a tall, spare man my own age off to the side and out of uniform. I hardly recognized him. It startled me at first, but he had a half smile and nodded when I recognized him. I was answering questions then, and he asked one. You come off as a very sympathetic character in the novel. Do you think others deserve to pay for the actions that day? I had answered that same question before, but I answered it differently now. It is only a novel. A friend of mine was fascinated by Dante's Divine Comedy. We discussed it once or twice. He said, in that poem, God does not decide a soul's fate. Rather, it is the person's state of mind at death that determines heaven or hell or purgatory. And he said, those in purgatory want to be there until they no longer feel the guilt of their sins. I think those responsible know their best punishment, I'm not the only one feeling guilt for Algator. I'm just the one they investigated. I'm the one whose career was destroyed. Alvy responded. So you harbor no ill will, no resentment? I didn't say that. I resent that the Marines focused on me. I resent that no one else was investigated, and it took a novel for the truth to vindicate me. Even the cover sheet of the investigation mentions my name, and the things I was never charged with. What kind of character assassination is that? My demons are in chapter 17 on. Do they face theirs, or do they live in their own minds, constructing a heaven out of something evil? Some of them are responsible for the murders of 29 people. I spoke rather softly then. I resent that commissioned officers carried out orders they knew would result in the deaths of dozens of non-combatants. I wanted the Marines to be good. I joined them to do good. And I wondered for years what happened to my best friend. He let me down that day in the sun. He let me down afterwards, too, when he ostracized me, probably to protect his career. I never heard a word from him. I needed him. These things I might not forgive anytime soon. I answered several more questions, and somewhere in there I lost track of Alvy. He was not around after the signing. I took a taxi to a motel. I hopped a free ride with my girlfriend home. She was ferrying a jet back from Louisiana, and Norman is just a little out of the way. It was the first time I had flown with her, although officially she was the co-pilot for Remy since they had a passenger and he the higher rating. No, I wasn't scared. She slipped the plane into the airport because she likes to approach a little high, and she warned me first. It's like flying sideways. It's all cool as long as the plane works. So you saw Alvy? Yes, and answered his questions. But he apparently didn't want to talk in private. Why is that, do you think? I think by the questions that he needed the protection of the group. He felt bad, and perhaps blames himself for the loss of our friendship. Maybe bad for following orders so obediently. I remember one talk we had, back at TBS, talking about deciding if an order was legal or illegal. He said as long as the order was clear he would follow it, because you never have all the information that the chain of command has. I said, but that's why they commission us to stop illegal acts, to use our judgment, to put it on the line to do what the situation requires. He just didn't agree with that. That's why those people died in that field. Alvy didn't turn to the captain, who was probably cussing me out, and say, "Sir, we can't identify any combatants." He followed orders, but didn't want to admit that there were no combatants. It was a failure. He felt safe in the bookstore. He knew I couldn't get upset with him in front of customers. You said you gave him hints in your answers. What do you mean? It was with him that I discussed literature so often. The Divine Comedy, openly mentioned in the first question. The second, Paradise Lost. Tweed spent hours one afternoon discussing the mind, can make a heaven of hell passage. I think his questions indicated he felt bad about things. The way he asked them, in public, and his disappearing, meant he is suffering too. I think he knew he was not strong enough to stand up to the captain. Perhaps he blames himself for Shannon Smith and Ray Zumwalt dying with that machine gun. But I think he suffers something. He showed up. I think that in itself means he regrets the loss of our friendship. How do you feel about him now? Jonas was pensive. I don't know. Better knowing that it mattered to him. Better. It's not perfect, but it is better than the years of silence. I sent him a letter years ago, just saying that I hoped our friendship survived the problems, asking him to contact me. You've never mentioned that before. I'm an onion with many layers. Callie rolled her eyes, and Jonas laughed. He did not respond. I put in the letter that he'd had a chance to do something good, and I thought he should think about that. I'd said the same thing about Callie at Sunmai. I think I was trying to salvage the friendship, offer a way ahead, but it didn't work. It's kind of my fault. Your fault? Yeah, I am convinced we officers were there not just to carry out orders, but to understand their purpose and implement them to reach that purpose. We are not just cogs in a machine, not in that situation. And if it costs us our careers, even our lives, it was our job to save those people. And that was obvious to Alvy at the bookstore. My fault. I am tired of Marines not taking responsibility for their orders, their actions, and their motives. Especially the officers. We're Americans. It means something, to me at least. It means we try to do good. Maybe the bookstore is a start. Maybe. It was an October Saturday morning that I spoke to Mom about my relationship with Emily. Mom, I'd like to ask her to marry me. Mom's eyes got serious and teary, and she hugged me. I'd like your help picking out a ring, something I can afford and that she'll like. We can do that whenever you're free, but I'd like to ask her soon. We can go today if you'd like. Leffler's? Somewhere else? Mitch Leffler owned a high-end jewelry store in Skygray and was a longtime family friend. People came from miles away to have him design or mount jewelry. Mom and Dad had grown up with Mitchell. I don't know if they'd ever gone to another jeweler. Loeffler's is perfect. Whenever you're ready. She was ready in 2 minutes. The pastor noticed that Jonas seemed uncomfortable talking about his religious beliefs. Are you a practicing Catholic, Mr. Sims? I go to Massachusetts. I believe many things Catholics profess. I think for myself, though. I went through a bad time, when I believed God was at best inactive in the world, and then that he probably did not exist at all. Something in the war that happened damaged my faith. But I have thought about it, and my faith that God is good is recovering. Do you love Emily? Yes. I wondered if I would ever find someone, and then I met her. She is great. I went years without a friend before that. She said, Pastor, what is the purpose of this discussion? He thought, it is to encourage the premarital couple to consider all those factors that are important and that might not be considered in a modern courtship. Have you considered children, their religion, where you will live? What are your goals over time? What careers do you want to pursue? What in your past could affect your life together? Diseases or injuries or relationships do not just go away. This meeting is to encourage you to face and discuss all those things that can influence your marriage for years to come. One of my colleagues used to teach that in general terms, the things you conflict over now, the things you argue about now, are the same as you will argue about in 20 years. I think he might be right. I'm not sure. Emily said, Jonas and I have our baggage. His is more profound, but mine is there. I had an earlier engagement, which I called off several years ago. Jonas had a major, traumatic event in the war in Afghanistan, which caused him PTSD and must be some of the reason for his quietness. Pastor raised his eyes and looked sharply first at Emily, whose clear, forthright eyes were sincere, and then at a man. In the claim of PTSD, it made some sense. Jonas spoke. Pastor, I want Emily to love me. I believe in God, but I am still considering his nature. I may consider it for the rest of my life. I will get our children to church on Sundays. At her church or mine, we'll work that out. I believe that God sees the whole person. So if it is a mistake to raise my kids Presbyterian and that is our decision, I trust God to see my failure is made in good faith. Pardon the pun. I trust Emily to make decisions with me. She is reasonable and beautiful and marvelous. Pastor smiled. Have you had therapy for the PTSD? Jonas responded, yes, I still do. You do not want to embellish? The pastor asked. Jonas smiled and said, I would prefer not to. He looked at Emily, and she recognized the line from a Melville story. The session became a discussion then, ranging over the topics. It was less an interview or class than a conversation about important and personal topics. Emily spoke of her flying, which she relied on more and more for a relatively steady income. It was likely her father would want her to take over his part of the business, which was practically the whole business since his partner let him run everything as long as there were good profits. I am not sure I want my future to be about business. I love literature too, but the money is much less. I've toyed with writing, and I'd like to teach I love seminars discussing books and writers. Jonas responded, are all these things mutually exclusive? Can a writer also lead seminars, fly planes as desired, and run a business? It sounds like you would be at a level in running the company that you could set hours, hire managers if it is too much. Emily considered. I still have several steps to getting the licenses I need for our biggest planes, and Dad is considering buying a larger one. I don't know. Pastor said, these are conversations worth having and they don't have to end. They can develop over time as interests and opportunities come and go. Emily, I can imagine a time when you are flying 1 day a week, running a seminar 2 times, writing in between. How do Jonas's plans complement or fit with yours? Or don't they? Jonas shook his head. I like what I'm doing. I teach high school in the day. I have the master's now. I want to add in coaching a sport, maybe 2 seasons. And my summers are mine. I might try to teach a course or 2 of history for summer learners, maybe over at Miami or Dayton, you see, or a community college. But I think it can be the steadier income to smooth out any of Emily's rough spots with flying and teaching. We can make it work, I think. Pastor went on. When do you want the children? How can you fit them into all these ideas? Emily said, eagerly. I think we should have the kids sooner. Dad is still going to run the plane shop for the foreseeable future. Now is the time for us to build that family. The kids would be in school when Dad starts winding down. I can be reducing the flying and building up the teaching over time. Pastor said, I think you have a good plan, but it is chock full of activity and work. Work is good, don't get me wrong, but you should talk about how you would handle a seriously ill child, or one of you disabled, or whatever. Everything must be flexible in a family. There's an old joke that when people make plans, God laughs. Keep your love for one another in your eyes and minds, invisible to all. Remember that your love for each other will allow most of your goals to be met in the long run. Love enhances marriage and career and family and all of life. Married, your every decision is the decision of the couple. And if your plans get in the way of your love, make new plans. It's your life together that builds the family. All the rest is just business. Pastor Lunker stood then and held out his hand to Jonas. Jonas, it's been a pleasure to meet you. I'm proud to conduct your wedding. Hopefully Father Rick will make it too. Thank you, Pastor. I'll think about what you've said. Emily said, Pastor, thank you so much. We'll be in touch soon. It was a Saturday morning in early November that they met with Pastor Lunker, and the meeting ended just after noon. They left hand in hand, Emily occasionally leaning her head against Jonas's shoulder. It was a gray fall day. Most of the leaves were fallen, and there was a sharp, cold wind. They walked to Emily's house and she invited Jonas in. As soon as she closed the door, Emily removed her coat and hung it. Then she kissed Jonas as he removed his. My parents are in Columbus, visiting Chris. Oh, when will they be back? Mom assured me not before tomorrow night. She was very specific, emphatic, even. Jonas kissed her softly, then hard. They broke their embrace and kiss and he said, The world is not as I thought it was. My girlfriend and her mom are conspiring to get us to have sex. That Friday evening, Emily and I went to dinner and then a Broadway-style musical in Cincinnati. I wore a suit and Em wore a lovely, elegant purple dress that slung from shoulder to shoulder and a warm wrap instead of a coat. It was not cold yet, at least that evening, and she looked stunning. We spoke in soft tones of us, in the future, and how we were going to live. We talked about having children, where we would send them to school, and places we might live depending on future jobs and decisions we would face as we grew. She held my arm as we walked from restaurant to theater, and then from theater to the car. The night was clear. At her door, I put my hands on her shoulders as a cool wind blew her red hair. Emily, I think it is that time we spoke of. She is so small that I decided one knee was not trite. She put her hands on my shoulders then. I do not want to wait longer. I hope you think I can make you happy. I know you can make my life better and me better. Please, will you marry me? I had hidden the ring in my jacket inside pocket. I pulled it out and opened the little box. She looked right at my eyes, not at the box, almost dismissing it for the moment. If you had no ring, the answer would be yes. If you could never afford one, yes. If someday we have hardship and must sell it for whatever we can get, yes. I love you. I never want to be long from you. She leaned forward, taller than I on my knee, and kissed me softly on the lips. Then she held out her left ring finger, and I put the ring on it. It was a little loose, but a good guess. It's beautiful, she said, admiring it. I stood, before I got a splinter in my trousers. Would you like to go in and show your parents? Or should I leave? No, you stay, and yes, we're going in now. Her mom and dad were there then, still up, anticipating the event probably. There were hugs, kisses, congratulations and best wishes, and a phone call to Chris, now working in Columbus with a small law firm. Emily was gushing as she spoke, which was unlike her, so she must really have been happy, and she had to talk first to Chris. Then she said, He wants to talk to you. Yeah, Chris? Great, huh? I just can't believe she threw in the towel and is marrying you. I had 100 lawyers lined up to date her. Well, what can you do? You acted too late. Seriously, Jonas, she's a great girl, and you two are great together. Now I gotta find someone so good for me. Congratulations, bro-to-be. It's a great feeling, Chris. Never felt like this. Happy for you, Jonas. She sounds the same way. Wish I were there tonight. I said, I'll be in touch. Gonna give this phone to your mom. I handed the phone over. It was a little after midnight. Emily and her dad were talking while mom was on the phone. I interrupted. It's a little late, but would you like to go show my mom and dad? Or wait until tomorrow? I think we have to go now, don't we? There must be a protocol to engagement announcements. So we did. It made a late but happy night for the Scotts and the Simses. My mom threw her arms around Emily and hugged the breath, almost the life out of her. Dad shook my hand, and then it was his turn to hug Emily and he engulfed her. Mom threw her arms around me and kissed me on the lips and said, She is so good. Honorable, you are so lucky. Yes, I am. I returned Emily to her house around 2:30 a.m. It was a tender and tired kiss at her door, and we parted for the night. Some days should never end. Mom, Emily said, It is, we haven't even. Mom, he asked me to marry him, and we have not had sex. We've had all these intimate moments. We kiss and hold hands, and it is just so unmodern. He doesn't worry about that rationalization about sexual compatibility that justifies so many people in premarital sex. It is not that we have anything against it, but the commitment was so important to him, and he had so much trouble getting past his PTSD. I'm just saying that for whatever reason, he is not just after sex or control or that crap I had to fight with Carl about. Her mother smiled. I think he's special in a lot of ways. That picture of him carrying the doomed child, the impact it had on him, the acceptance of responsibility in that fight. He is so mild, seeks no reward, accepts the erroneous blame because he knows he did right things. Your father and I have read everything, and he is just the most remarkable, gentle, good man. His Marines loved him, and we couldn't be prouder that you have chosen to marry. He loves you. It's all over him. Yeah, he does. It is a wonderful moment. Emily held her mom's hand. Have you decided a date? Generally, we'd like to get married at our church, and hopefully he'll be able to convince his priest to participate. He thinks his parents would prefer his church be involved. I think he wants it too. Soon, Ma. Before Christmas. Good. We'll call Reverend Lunker and see when we can hold the ceremony. What about a reception? We'd like one of the church reception halls. Both have them. It might be more convenient if it's in our church basement, but we could go over to Merciful God. They have a larger room in their school they let people use for medium or small receptions. We're thinking 100 people? Her mom was nodding. Whatever you two want. I'll call the pastor. And the Reverend Lunker will want to talk to you as a couple. They used to have classes for couples about to wed. You and Jonas should go visit your pastors and be sure you do what you need done. Maybe we should elope. It solves a lot of problems. Your father has often regretted that we did not. Emily smiled. Jonas and Emily spoke with her pastor about marriage, family, children, faith, and themselves. Pastor Lunker was an old man. He had known the Scotts since he'd first come to Fairfield in the 1960s as a young assistant. He knew Emily's parents, her grandparents, her uncles and aunts. He had baptized Emily. He did not know Jonas. If the Catholic priest refuses to participate, will you go through with the wedding, Jonas? Yes, but I expect he'll participate. He's a friend, we grew up together. Emily was smiling. Jonas finished, but yes, I would go through with the ceremony if the priest refused. Jonas grabbed her hand. I'm going to make reservations at the Iron Forge. We'll have dinner around 8, if I can get the reservation. Then we'll go to the Old Fort Hotel, again if I can get reservations. Emily leaned into him. So you don't want to have sex with me in my room? I would like to have sex with you here on the wet ground, on a table, anywhere. But you are too special for our first time to be in a place that you see as home and mom and dad. I think it is just too adolescent. I'd like to dance at the forge and make it a little romantic. Is that okay? She held his arm. Yes, it sounds great. He called for the reservations, and they were in luck. The forge got them in at 8:30 and the Old Fort was full, but the Indian Motel had a room for them. Jonas told his parents he would be out all night, and he knew he wasn't fooling anyone. But there were no raised eyebrows. He wore a dark suit and bought a corsage for Emily. She wore a darker blue dress, with a white shawl and her winter coat for the colder weather. She liked the corsage, which he put on her left breast with his fumbling help. The Iron Forge was all that he'd heard. Its specialty was flash-seared steaks, and you do not dare ask for rare, medium, or well done. The chef was rumored to come out of the kitchen to identify and berate anyone who did not want steaks that were flash-seared in the long run. The steaks were crusty and medium rare inside, so they ordered the flash-seared steak. Emily was stunning in her dark dress. Somehow she'd had her hair done up, and her neck was lovely. She attracted some attention in that dining room, and Jonas felt that for once he was not drawing more looks for notoriety than she for pulchritude. Checking her coat in the entryway, several men had not noticed her because of her stature, but actually stumbled in haste clearing a path when she asked for pardon to proceed into the room. They shared red wine and enjoyed the music in the other room, visible through a large doorway. There were a few couples dancing. Waiting for their order, Jonas asked her to dance, and they performed a close and slow semblance of a box step. In this case, Jonas felt he was holding her back. She moved with a grace and rhythm, and she was one of those girls who liked fast dance. Jonas decided he wanted lessons and determined to get some before his wedding next month, if he could. It was a sweet and sexy and wonderful evening. They arrived at the Indian Motel about 11:30. The room was classy, and they felt nervous entering. They each had a small bag with clothes for the morning, and Emily had a black baby doll to wear immediately. Jonas waited while she prepared, pulling back the covers on the bed and turning on one dim light. When she emerged, he was actually breathless. Her body was small and slim and pale, freckled skin was set off by red hair down around her shoulders. Her arms were defined and legs. She was perfect, Jonas thought. He wondered, how do I live up to the beauty and character of this woman? She stood at the entrance to the sleeping room, her left hand high on the wall, one knee bent in a pose. She did not smile, there was something else in her eyes. Jonas finally stood, and his breath returned. He put his finger to his lips, letting her see he was happy in the silence. He reached her, put his hands on her bare back. He leaned to her ear and said, "You take my breath away." Literally. Then he moved his lips to hers, softly, and her arms were up around his neck. He lifted her, lips still locked together. He did not break the kiss, but he lifted under her knees and carried her to the bed. He broke that kiss to gently place her on the bed. She thought, "He is so handsome. I did not realize his arms and shoulders, and his eyes see into me." He soon stood beside her, and she saw what she touched through clothes and torrid passing moments, now stiff, now upraised. She said, still in their bedroom whisper, "Move up here, Jonas." He sidled to her. They made love, and it was amazing. Next day, Emily received a call. Emily, Tom Marks. She was holding a phone to her ear. "Colonel, what a surprise. I certainly did not expect you to call." "Yes, well, I tried Jonas, but his phone seems to be off, and I wanted to reach him as soon as possible. Is something wrong?" "No," he said. "Not really, but a 10th picture has shown up. From Al Gator. I thought Summersill only took 9. Was someone else taking pictures?" "No. I received an email from Summersill with a note that he held it back because he thought it was too graphic and he thought Jonas would be upset. He attached it to the email. He says he thought it might be important, and he felt guilty. I'm looking at it now. It shows Jonas kneeling on one knee, bending over the little girl in the middle of the street, with tears, and his hand on her arm. Her head is not clear, but it is obviously... Anyway, I am submitting it to the archive. It won't be part of the report, but it will be an addendum, should the investigation ever be reopened. More info discovered after the case was closed, which certainly casts no doubt on the finding, that sort of thing. Will it upset people? It's the most moving picture of tragedy and war I've ever seen. The look on his face. "I don't think we need to protect him from it," she said. "He's described exactly the action you say is in the picture, in therapy anyway. And to me, I think you should just send it to him in an email and put it in the file, along with the others." She thought for a second. Is Summersill in trouble? "No, I protected him. He only saw the investigators one day, and they were arrogant and implied all sorts of things to check his statement. It's not like he wanted to help them. They were threatening everyone in 2nd Platoon with this charge or that allegation. When he surrendered the pictures in the first place, he sent them to me. No one asked him for them, or knew he'd taken them. He did it to help Jonas. And it did. I'll tell Jonas. If you'd rather send it to me, I can prepare him for it and see what he thinks before I show him," she said. "I'll do that. I need your email." She told him, and a minute later the picture was in her inbox. She did not open it. It was that night that Jonas visited, and she said she had talked to the colonel. He said that Summersill took a 10th picture. "He sent it to me, to show you." Jonas asked, "Why didn't he just send it to me?" "He wanted to talk to you first, see if you wanted to see it. He says it's of you and the little girl. I haven't opened the file yet. I see that kid every day," he said, looking out. They were at the kitchen table. "I'll get my laptop," Emily said. Jonas called to them in the other room. Jonas went to the doorway. "Mrs. Scott, Mr. Scott, they found another picture from Al Gator. Emily is getting her computer to see it. Are you?" "Oh, yes, indeed," they said over each other, and got up to come to the kitchen. Emily sat at the table and turned on the computer, opened her email. She found the message and opened the attachment. The picture was very clear and filled most of the screen. She looked at it for several seconds and shook her head. She stood and turned to Jonas, embracing him with arms about his neck, a hug her mother joined. Walt just looked at the picture that filled the screen, struggling for imperturbability. The picture and a story of the atrocity at Al Gator were in many newspapers the next Sunday. The New York Times had it on the front page, under the title Genuflection to Tragedy. A paper in Australia said it summarized eloquently the American adventure in Afghanistan. Most cleaned up the picture digitally, clarifying, but not aggrandizing the child's wounds. Jonas was identified as U.S. Marines 2nd Lieutenant Jonas Sims. Jeremiah in agony was mentioned, and calls for investigating the other officers involved in the incident followed. "We went to see Father Rick on a Wednesday 2 weeks before the wedding, when he was able to get away to see us. I had come home expecting to take back up with my old friend, but his ordination had led immediately to a new assignment far across the archdiocese, so we had only talked a few times. Rick greeted Emily with 2 hands holding her one, and he looked at her like she was marrying me for his sake. The guy was always a flirt, and he saw no reason to let a vow of celibacy change it. Rick is very tall, and he towered over Emily. I warned her not to hurt her neck looking up. "I saw the picture, Jonas," he said as he shook my hand. I read Jeremiah, and I just want to say, well, God bless you." "I thought you only read religious books," I said. "It is a religious book," he said. Tom would get a kick out of that. Rick wanted to know our views on children, raising them as Christians, and other things that would affect the religious family. It was amazing how similar his questions and ideas were to Pastor Lunker's. He said he'd contact the pastor as soon as he could to arrange the ceremony. Rick is a gregarious guy, so I wondered how the older and more serious Pastor Lunker would respond. I should not have worried. By the end of the rehearsal dinner, they were telling religious jokes and acting like best buddies. So at the wedding, we had a young Catholic priest in his vestments standing next to a Presbyterian pastor in his, the bride in a blue off-the-shoulder wedding dress, the groom in black. Emily's cousin Eva was maid of honor in medium blue, but her dress had sleeves and covered her shoulders, and Deborah, a woman who scheduled flights for the air service who had known Emily for a decade, was in similar blue but a high neck. Tall Colonel Marks wore his dress blues this day as best man, and Chris, poor short Chris, stood beside him in black. The church was rather small, seating perhaps 120 comfortably, but quite bright and beautiful. When Pastor instructed us to face one another, we did. I took both Emily's hands as we had rehearsed the night before. Then I looked out at the crowd, Mom, Dad, in the first pew, and Emily's mom and dad on the other side of the church also in the first, and next to them the surviving grandparents. Barry Lind was out there with his wife. Several of my students were toward the back. I had not sent them invitations, but I'd announced they were all welcome if they wanted to attend. I saw Jane Miller Austin and the man who stole her from me, trying to corral 2 little ones. Sharon Martin, my principal, was with her husband, the pale, white-haired, ghostly Perry Martin. Father Elkins was sick in the hospital and could not attend. I saw then in the back too I had not been able to reach. A huge black man in plain clothes, casual pants and shirt and hair that said he was not on active duty, was DeAndre Turbish, and beside him Ken Healy, in classic green with another rocker, making him a gunnery sergeant. They saw me looking at them, and both nodded slightly. They were grinning. Emily saw me looking, and looked also, and noticed those two. I leaned forward and kissed her on the cheek, and she smiled in surprise. The audience laughed. She said, "We didn't rehearse that kiss." I shrugged and said, "Sometimes I don't follow directions." Tom Marks said quietly, "I'll vouch for that." Father Rick shook his head, and Pastor Lunker even smiled. He looked at Rick and said, "Let's get these 2 married. No one remembers our vows. No one remembers our kiss after the vows. But Mom thought the kiss on the cheek before we began was touching." There was a moment then of congratulations before the recessional, after Pastor Lunker presented us as husband and wife. We visited each set of parents and grandparents, accepting congratulations, and then returned to the altar. I looked out at DeAndre and Ken, made eye contact, and nodded with a smile. The maids and men gathered around to congratulate us. I thanked Tom for finding Turbo and Ken. He said, "It wasn't the whole corps that abandoned you. A bunch of grunts will never forget the example you set." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.